students and the public, and of course to our invited guests. We really appreciate both of you making the time out of your busy schedules to come spend the evening with us. We are so grateful. So thank you very much for doing this with us. So of course, our two distinguished guests, Annabell Selldorf of Selldorf Architects in New York City in the center, and Jennifer Luce of Luce Studio in La Jolla. And so, yes, we're just so grateful for you to be here. My name is Megan Groff. I'm the practice coordinator for Woodbury University School of Architecture, and I'm also an adjunct faculty member, and I teach professional practice in the San Diego campus, and hopefully many of you are from my class. Check the roster there. When we set up this event, we really wanted to have this be an opportunity for discussion rather than slideshow presentations. And we're so lucky to have two masterworks by these architects in our backyard. I'm sure all of you have been to the Mingue International Museum that opened at Balboa Park in September. And then, of course, we have the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, in La Jolla, that we're having the pleasure of getting to experience as a public this Saturday. So we've all been watching it go up the last few years, and very excited to get to experience that ourselves. There's so many interesting overlaps between these two projects. They were both started around the same time, 2015 and 2014, and they opened within months of each other. So I'm sure we'll hear more about what took to, between those dates and all of the, sticky, complex aspects of them. Also, both these architects, they founded their firms around the same time, and they also remain at the lead kind of head position of these firms and these practices, which we as architects know is actually quite rare for women in architecture. So while we look forward to discussing the similarities, we're also very keen to kind of tease apart and discuss kind of the differences of thoughts and opinions, approaches to architecture and practice, and to hear more about the challenges and opportunities of working within such complex contexts, which they both do so well. It seems seamless, like it wasn't even complex to begin with. So I'll begin by giving a brief introduction to both of our guests, and then we'll have kind of a moderated discussion that we'll try to keep short so that we'll have lots of time for question and answer, because we want this to be a conversation not just between the two architects, but with the entire group here, all the students. Please ask questions, and all of our invited guests as well. So, can't wait. So in the center, we have Annabell Selldorf. Annabell is the principal of Selldorf Architects, a 70-person architectural design practice that she founded in New York City in 1988. The firm creates public and private spaces. This is going to go too fast. Okay, that manifest a clear and modern sensibility to enduring impact. Selldorf Architects has worked on public and private projects that range from museums and libraries to recycling facility, and it scales from the construction of new buildings to the restoration of historic interiors and exhibition design. The firm's clients include cultural institutions and universities such as the Frick Collection, the National Gallery in London, Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, Smithsonian American Art Museum, Hispanic Society Museum and Library, the Clark Art Institute, and the Neue Galleria in New York. In addition, the firm has created numerous galleries for David Werner, Hauser and Wirth, and the Gladstone Gallery, among others, and designed exhibitions for the Frick Madison, Whitney Museum, Frieze Masters, and the Venice Art Biennale. Born and raised in Cologne, Germany, Ms. Selldorf received a Bachelor of Architecture from Pratt Institute and a Master's of Architecture from Syracuse University. She is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and serves on the board of the Architectural League of New York, the World Monuments Fund, the Chinata Foundation, and the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College, and is taught at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Additionally, Ms. Selldorf is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and was the recipient of the prestigious Award in Architecture in 2014. In 2016, she received the AIA New York Medal of Honor. And to her right is Jennifer Luce. Jennifer Luce was born in Montreal and spent 15 years living in Ottawa before winning an international competition to build the CIT in Washington, D.C. She received her Bachelor of Architecture with distinction from Carleton University, Ottawa, and is a member of the Alumni Council of the Carleton Design School. She is also a recipient of the A. Dunton Alumni Award of Distinction from Carleton University. In 1994, Jennifer received her Master's of Design Studies from Harvard University and is a 9-year member of the Alumni Council there. She currently holds an appointed director position at the Harvard Alumni Association. She currently sits on the Advisory Council for LAND, a public art initiative in Los Angeles, and on the board of directors for Art of Elan, an organization committed to educating and exposing diverse audiences to classical music. In 2016, Jennifer was elevated to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects. Jennifer began her career winning an international competition to decide the Center for Innovative Technology, Washington, D.C., 2 months after graduating from Carleton. This project became the first smart building in the U.S., executed as a partnership between Virginia academic institutions and the Virginia state government. In 1990, Jennifer established Luce at Studio, a collaborative interdisciplinary architectural practice in California that focuses on museums, public art projects, urban design interventions, creative workspace, and a variety of collaborations with artists and landscape architects. The studio is passionate about research and new technologies and materials, offering expertise in architecture, site-specific art, and landscape installations, furniture design, and graphics. The studio's projects have been featured in exhibitions internationally, including a retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Art La Jolla in 2009, and the California Biennale at the Pasadena Museum of Contemporary Art in 2010. The studio was named Design Vanguard by the Architecture Record in 2005, received a 2006 Business Week Award for Design Innovation, and it has received a total of 25 awards from the American Institute of Architects. So please, a round of applause, and let's welcome projects that are probably the elephants in the room that need to be discussed. Of course, the MIGE, International Museum and Museum of Contemporary Art in La Jolla. And I guess it would be great to start off by hearing a little bit from both of you about kind of the approach to design, kind of the ethos, but also how you approach the context of design that you were working within. Both of them are in such historic kind of foundations, Museum of Contemporary Art, an incredible kind of multi-headed piece of architecture, maybe it is. And then of course the Mingue being in Balboa Park, kind of the central jewel of San Diego in many ways, but also one that hasn't quite been as much loved as maybe it needs to be in recent years. So I don't know, I guess I'd like to hear, just approach the context and how, both of those projects kind of got started, I think.
Okay. Am I on? Yeah. Balboa Park is an amazing place. When I moved to San Diego in the late 80s, it's the place I walked every morning. And in some ways, took for granted. But it's only when you're hired to work in the context that you begin to understand the importance, the history, and the respect that one needs to give to the context. And so, in beginning to work with Rob Seidner, who's right here in the front row, amazing person, we began to talk about the mission of the museum, yes, but also the mission of the park as community building. And it's such an important thing to think about where you're working and why it's important to do that. So I think it's on the register of National Historic Places. It feels a little daunting. Built for the exposition in 1915, and that, I have to say, it's essentially a series of Hollywood sets that housed certain interests at the time. But now, to build an architecture around that, it's a huge challenge to understand how you take a facade and make it place, how you open a facade to open a museum to its community. And these were the conversations we had for well over a year in the beginning of the process of 2015. It was a very rare experience for me as an architect to not draw for the first year, but to think and to converse, to speak to community and to speak to staff and really understand why the context is so important to this institution. And it was just a fantastic thing to not pick up your pencil for a while and just have a whole series of conversations. So I think this is where I learned the importance of that context and how we could respectfully work within it.
I'll share. Sharing is caring. So in a very long time ago, when we were invited to participate in a small competition around the expansion of the museum in La Jolla, the first thing we did was actually Lisa Green and Sarah Carolo, two partners in the firm, said, secret mission, we go there, we check it out. They came back and they said, very difficult project. So we said, we're all in. Turns out that this museum is not only a museum that has one of the most magnificent pieces of architecture as its base. Irving Gill is just such a wonderful architect. Sincerity, simplicity, serenity were the three S's that he let himself be guided by. And since my last name starts with an S, I thought, we'll match. No, but all kidding aside, so there is this wonderful building that sets the stage, if you will, and then a series of architectural interventions, additions and expansions that turned a private house into a rather large museum with a large auditorium. The trouble, however, was that they had absolutely minimal gallery space. So they were able to produce fantastic exhibitions, but they were always very small. No room to show the permanent collection. And eventually the museum was able to purchase a site to the south. And that seemed easy enough. You just add on to the south and there you go. Only to find out that it's located on a very steep hill, that there's regulations that I never even dreamt of, that have to do with height and not to mention any number of other California regulations and so on. And we embarked on a project that took us all these years, working very closely with Catherine Cameron, who's also here tonight, to conquer the hurdles. It was the design that was so difficult. It wasn't really understanding what we needed to do, but it was bringing it all together and making sure that we could make a place for the community to come to art. And I feel like we did that, and it took a great deal of patience, and yes, a great many conversations, a lot of understanding of what the collection was, who the supporters were, doing community meetings, and so on and so forth. But there we are.
Interesting. so, both of you kind of commented a little bit about, within the working process, the great kind of challenge of both of these sites and the great opportunities of these sites. And, I'm thinking about, collaboration and the role of the architect in collaboration. And that we're obviously do not work by ourselves. We never work by ourselves. We could not work by ourselves. And so, in both of these projects, how, and I'm thinking about Mingay in particular, but also Museum of Contemporary Art, of how do you structure collaboration, or how do you like to structure collaboration? Maybe, the idealized form, but also the practical form of, these projects are so in tune to what the art is in this case. I think there's some things the architecture does in the framing and the procession that are just brilliant, but it's also, there's that right piece of art right there waiting for you at the end of the hallway. And in the brilliant natural light room with the beautiful light scoops like the metal, but there's specific art that is for that room, And so I think of, working within collaboration within arts, but also in the Mingay, example, the artists. So much of the work we did that's really wonderful is the collaboration of artists to create pieces for the museum. So I was wondering if you could just reflect a little bit about, what that experience is like, both when you enter a project you started thinking it's going to be like, and then how that evolves.
Yeah, what you're bringing up is the absolute joy of the Mingay project for me, is to have the opportunity to work with the artist in the intrinsic fabric of the architecture. We've worked for years, we've maintained a very small studio so that we could bring in collaborators for each project. And often there was a fine artist or a poet or a filmmaker that you brought to the table, and it's what energizes the conversation for us. So here we are at Mingay, where Rob and his team are encouraging and supportive of the idea of artists actually becoming a part of your project. They're not simply there to consult or to be a part of a workshop, but they're intrinsically connected. I sometimes feel, because we have a small studio, like the director of a film, where I can think about bringing the talent together. So we have a small studio, Jonas, Lori, Gabe here? Gabe, there you go. And Anne Worth, are you here? Where is Anne? Oh, there she is. Anne and I worked together for so many years, and it's just been such a joy. So we have this core group, but in the case of Mingay, we could bring those artists along with us to design things. What an incredible opportunity, and it added a layer of richness to the architecture. It's about a little bit of humility, of giving up some of that control so that the artists can express themselves, and you feel so overjoyed to give them that opportunity and to have them, many of them, work in the scale of architecture for the first time. It was just really, really exciting.
Still doesn't. Yeah, I think that probably the work we did in San Diego is different from Mingay, because we knew that we wanted to and needed to create gallery space. We've had some experience doing that, and a great deal of it for me is to think that architecture is accessible through the narrative of circulation, the experience of the visitor. Stand-up comedy or something. The experience of the visitor is what, in a way, becomes the skeleton of how I think about it. There were all kinds of things, as I mentioned, height regulations, a very steep So a lot of specific site situations that we needed to negotiate. But essentially, I think that the experience of light, proportion, and a kind of inevitable circulation supported an idea of understanding how the new building would tie into the series of older buildings and do that with generosity. I said how much I loved the Irving Guild building, the complexity of the larger Drew and Ventura Scott Brown editions were much more complicated to unite. Some people have been critical over the removal of the pergola that Ventura Scott Brown placed in front of the carefully renovated Irving Guild building. But it presented in my mind a lack of clarity to the ensemble of the whole. And I'm incredibly proud of this new building that is a real piece of architecture that can stand on its own 2 feet. But speaking about collaboration, it collaborates with the other buildings. And people can experience it that way. And that was a very strong motivator for us to think, it's people who make architecture, it's people who inhabit architecture, and that experience was very much in the foreground to everything.
Yeah. Whoa. Sorry. I think there's a distinct similarity between the projects, even though they're very different, in that both are responding, communicating with a California landscape that's fairly unique. With Mingay Balboa Park, the unbelievable horticultural power of what Kate Sessions did to the park. And then, Annabelle, with your project, the power of the ocean. And what I love about what you've done is that each of the connectors of old to new are these sort of walks that allow you a view of the tree and the cairn or the ocean. It's a moment of respite where the connector is so meditative in a really, really beautiful way.
This raises the question of how do you both design? And maybe that's not a fair question, but hand, section, plan. I imagine as with all architects, it's going between scales, it's going between modes, but is there a way that you approach a project or that you like to work in that kind of helps kind of make ideas reality, but also to test ideas? You know, is it model, is it hand, is it all computer now? And then obviously it's changed. I imagine in the last 2 years, maybe it's been perhaps a little bit different. But yeah, I'd just be curious. I haven't heard either of you talk in all the different kind of publications I have read of both of you talking about your work. I haven't heard that fit. So how do you like to work, and then how do you actually work?
I think every project is different. Every project has its own requirements. At the end of the day, it has to be specific. So the design process, in a way, adapts to it. Very quickly, it requires dialogue with the partners, the people in the office, the clients, the consultants. But I think in the beginning, I have to draw one at the same time, one and the same thing 152 times. it's always in plan and not very sophisticated. And then somebody has to come and say, no, you really can't do this. And then it goes back and forth. And it's fairly primitive, but it's also deliberate. And there's comes a time when it becomes iterative with other people, right? Because you think, I've got it now, and then you realize that's not at all the case. It doesn't come that easy. The one thing I can say is I can't make you can't make architecture in one throw. It takes a huge amount of work, a huge amount of consideration, and you can't do it in your head. So you have to do all these different things. I don't know how to draw on the computer. And so it's kind of a good thing because I need to rely on the help of others. But that's quintessentially what architecture is all about, right? I think architecture means collaboration in the true sense of it. And so, but it also, I sort of know when I'm after something that it helps to sort of push the process along. Obviously, you don't do it alone. Obviously, you don't sit in a dark corner and come up with some brilliant idea. But there's things that we pursue and that I feel like after 2 years of COVID, I'm more articulate about because I had to verbalize virtually everything with the screens because I can't draw myself. It's like somebody had shackled me to the chair. I didn't enjoy that at all, but it's helpful, I think. To the natural process.
Well, we started our practices around the same time, so I also don't know how to draw on the computer, but I think for me and for our studio, we're always balancing this notion of logic and poetry. Whether we're reading, looking, sketching, it's a balance that I feel is really important because if you're going to be a poet in the architecture field, discipline, you have to have logic around it in order to bring people with you. And so we're always either studying a problem and its solution or looking for the soulful response that can validate it. And one supports the other. And I know that that's not a mode of drawing, but it's sort of a mode of thinking about things. And I realize, I think the studio is probably really frustrated that I do everything in elevation. And I'm just trying to figure out while we're sitting here why that is. But I think it's because I'm watching someone move through space in the elevation. In the plan, it's a little bit more disconnected. In the elevation, I can imagine us being a part of a space, and it's just the way I've drawn for 35 years.
So practice. So as you said, both started your firms around the same time, 88 and 90. Okay, so within.
She's old.
Okay, so reflect on, the beginning of your firms were very different in terms of, what propelled both of you into practice and at what scale you were working at then and what scale you're working at now. Based on, just thinking about how you have designed your own practice and how maybe it'd be interesting for you to reflect, or I'd be interested in hearing you reflect a little bit about, going into practice, what were kind of some of the goals and challenges that you were looking for and opportunities that maybe now, so many years of projects later, do you have a different, maybe approach to practice that you've seen it evolve? I imagine it has, definitely, especially as you've worked with collaborators and partners and various projects that probably pushed a certain evolution as well. But yeah, just in terms of the evolution of practice that you have experienced, both by design and maybe not by design.
So when I began to practice with Luce A studio, meaning and in French, and collaboration was absolutely the key to the evolution, and it has remained that pretty strongly and clearly. I think I once had a beau, it was no longer my beau, because of this kind of comment. He said, "You're not building a business, you're building your lifestyle." And I think that is so true, because we live the passion of what we do every day, all day, and it formulates our lives and the lives of our studio, which I consider to be my family. And it's every moment, it's every waking hour, and it's everything you look at, it's everything you read, and it's the most wonderful thing. And I've seen other artistic disciplines that have parts of that, but not the whole, because we really are living and being in the built environment, which is just so different from many others.
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part. No, completely agree with that. I'm just thinking, for me, it was a little bit different in that I wasn't planning to have an office. To this day, I'm a little bit superstitious. I don't like to plan ahead. I really don't like looking at my thinking that I have no time for the next few months. But the change in practice comes with confidence. I was very happy to do very small projects because I could get my head around them. I could understand dimensions, I could understand the people I was working with, trades, collaborators, clients, and little by little you gain confidence. And then that confidence allows you to let others in and take pleasure in other people's intelligence. And then you realize you can't do anything without other people. And then you get to be very sort of appreciative of that because that process becomes so different. But the practice changes as a result, because I do agree with you that I don't have a hobby, I don't really do anything else. And I am very deeply passionate about what we do. But it's also hard. It's not, architecture is not a hobby. It's not a lifestyle. Now I work, I think about paying rent, think about the needs that people in the office have, and I think about the work that we take on. It absolutely is a business. But having said that, it's also something that I'm proud of, because it considers the sort of political dimensions of architecture. I think that when we study architecture, and we learn to think, to look, to take into consideration how and why we do things. And better at that as a team. And so I like to make fun. But it's very serious, and if anything, it feels more serious to me as I get on, because it matters so much more that what we do makes a difference. And there's so many topics that I feel like, whoa, I didn't ever think about sustainability when I started in practice. I'm ashamed of that, actually. Social justice and equity, and that felt like that's not for me to discuss. That had to just, I'd like to sort of think that I could embrace those topics, but no, nobody can if you're not really addressing, confronting, and thinking about these things. And so, the older I get, there's an ever bigger pile of really difficult things to do. And somehow that feeds into the practice.
So that is a great segue, because I would like to talk about that a little bit more. I watched a presentation you gave at Design in Gala, which I loved because you presented this with the idea that you did. And I just really appreciated the humility in the way that you presented it, because it was beautiful project, this is how we did it, but also kind of the lingering question of, I don't know if we were the right people to be doing this. And we're happy we did it. It was a great experience for us. We think it's a great project for the community, but I'm still not sure that this was we were the right people and I really appreciate kind of the open-endedness, because that is so much of what we as architects do, right? We engage with the complexities of the built environment. We know what we're being asked to do, but also what are the questions we aren't asking, and how do we fit into a larger system? And I just, I really appreciate that. And also, Jennifer, I heard a lecture or a podcast you did where you discussed, the need for greater humility in architecture. And that was something that was of interest in kind of exploring more. So I think, so now, both of you, reflecting on kind of the social justice and environmental justice kind of issues, things that are laid before us, and especially in architecture, which is a very, it's a very complicit profession, but also one that is arm's length and as a business away from it. How are you both envisioning practice moving forward? Because it seems like there's no way to not, there's no way to turn back now. I guess you could, people could, but it would be very foolish to turn back now. So, whether maybe this is not a fully formed kind of approach, but how are you both thinking about it? I guess it's, kind of would like to tease.
I think for many decades, our work has been in the private realm, and very meaningful and purposeful, and has made environments for people to flourish. But working in the civic realm with Rob and Nikkei has opened up such a plethora of subject matter of how to be responsible to your community, to the world, how to share good design and have it be meaningful in all of those contexts. And Nikkei particularly being an art of the people, how do we share art with as many people as possible? That those responsibilities felt very large, but so incredibly satisfying to try to solve and to try to do better with. And so I think our practice would love to do more of that. And so I think for us it would become a balance between private and public, and how we can contribute in both realms in a meaningful way.
well is that do a little bit of both, because the private, is it private realm? Private sphere, is where you mess around with detail, scale, etc. And that's, of course, very much at the core of what we learn and grew up with. And what ultimately is in the, makes the built environment. I think that the built environment never ceases to be important. So we can talk about all of these other topics that become more articulate in the public realm. Nevertheless, as architects, we produce the physical manifestation of what we've been thinking about. And I can't really answer how we're going to address that. What I know is that once it's in your head, and once you're thinking about something, you don't want to think about it. I think we have to wean ourselves off of all kinds of bad habits if we want to participate in a climate conscious building process. Then there are all kinds of things that we can't do anymore. And it's not something we learn in a day. And I think it's kind of true for everything. Everything that is deeply embedded in language, and language is what informs our thinking. So the more critical you can be with the words that inhabit your brains, the more confrontation you can produce. And not that interested in provocation, but I really am very interested in finding pathways to have better understanding of what our nature is and how we can live up to the expectations of resistance and so on.
Well, I know I could ask questions for another hour, but I would love to open this up to questions and comments from the audience. So we can take them one by one or 2 by 2 questions.
I'd like to hear from each architect what they are particularly pleased with and have been restructured, what they want us to notice that we might notice, the things that you're pleased with.
I would like you to notice about Mingay that there's a generosity of spirit that the institution has given back to its community through design, for sure, through the advancement of public space and civic space in the park, and just how wonderful and rare that is. But I also would like you to notice every detail. Not because an architect has made the detail, but because the details represent the mission of the museum, that it is about craft. And I have always been so passionate about craft, and our studio is always exploring it, to preserve it, to in some ways make sure that it doesn't leave our understanding of space. Just as Mingay wants to preserve this notion of craft, of making useful objects of everyday life. So I want you to notice the details for that reason, for this idea that they intrinsically bring us joy.
Sometimes it's definitely so true when you go there and that is what you feel. It's really awesome. Of course, I want you to notice everything too. I find that people see different things from the ones that I see, and that makes me really very happy when people do. I would say that it would be nice if you noticed how deeply linked our expansion of the museum is with the site and a particular locale. I'd be really, really pleased if you saw how much we took that into consideration and how it influenced proportions and rendition of daylight. And then go straight to the art. There's such a wonderful connection, and let it take you, get into it, get excited, and as a result, I think you will find circulation patterns that we thought about a lot. You'll find the things that you like, but I, for one, when I went yesterday for the first time in the full installation, I was delirious with joy, and it's a building that brings people to art, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, walking through the museum now, I feel like I'm on a journey through, and I think the streets of Venice make sense to me because ultimately the path and then what you're experiencing, the art, make you lose yourself. And eventually you come out the other end and you come out transformed. And I just think that's really wonderful. Whereas the previous iterations of the museum, there was this sort of staccato struggle between the parts, and now they feel like we're flowing.
Students from Pro Practice 3.
I have a student perspective question. If I
We're always students.
So if I'm in my 20s, which I'm not anymore, and my desire is to be an architect in the future, and I want to, in 30 years, I want to do projects like what you have done. What are the skill sets? What are the 3-4 most important skills for me to gain over the next 20, 30 years? So I'm able to sit in a chair like you and talk about this amazing project that we designed. So what are the skill sets that, as a young student, you recommend me to pursue?
Constant curiosity.
I know so many architects, and they're all so different from one another. I think there's a sort of profound commitment and conviction that is paired with patience. And they say that about what does it take to get to Carnegie Hall? Patience. Yeah, so I think you have to really be prepared. There's a lot to do in architecture, and it takes a long time, and it takes longer, costs more, it's more difficult, and you still want to do it. And I think persistence, I think, is a really very big part of it. And I would love to think you have to be a really nice person. No, that's not it.
It's interesting. You talk about more characteristics attitude rather than the ability to draw or see things or how you design space. So it's interesting that you bring up more attitude, curiosity, persistence, patience, rather than the things that we study in architect school.
Really astute. I think that one of the most important things that you can learn in architecture school is developing your own personal process of thinking and then articulating. And that's it. That's everything. Because we learn all the things that we're talking about after those long studio nights in school, spending the long studio nights at work, and knowing that that's going to go on and on and on. But yeah, being able to tell a story, narrate a story, write a story about a building that's what you want to leave school with.
Speaking to details for the Museum of Contemporary Art, what led you to the exterior palette choices of material? Putting up against, as you said, Hill, William Drew, material. As the first time I drove past it, my head literally snapped. I was so excited and almost drove off into the because it spoke to me immediately.
I'm really glad that nothing worse happened. Thank you for saying that. I think that it was one step at a time. The architecture of Irvingville is all very distinct, and so is the architecture of what used to be Woodbury and then became with the large theater. It all looked to us like somebody had used pancake batter and did everything in just that. And we wanted it to be more crisp, more distinct. And with that, I feel we gave more definition to each of the other building works as well. Especially when we come across from the coast, Wall Street. Anyway, no, not Copenhagen. I just wondered, is it Coast Road? Boulevard, of course. How the buildings sort of lock into one another has become such an interesting thing. I want to say it happened by itself, which it really didn't. But it was a series of compositional decisions that eventually came into play.
So I'm guessing you had a lot of behind-the-scenes access to the collections in the museums. Was there anything that you came across in the collections that may have influenced how you thought about being part of the building material you brought up?
I think it's not so much that it was any one work of art, but multiple works of art that locate this museum in this place. It's the Southern California Light. It's a Southern California School of Art. And the really distinct way in which these artists looked at space and art. And yeah, that played a very big role in our conversations with Catherine and her colleagues. And it is when I saw the installation yesterday, and I thought that's where it all started, is that we started to think about those kinds of work.
Jennifer should answer that question too. Because you use the collection. Sorry.
Thanks, Catherine. There is no doubt that this Mayday project evolves from collection. And Rob and I spent many hours, Sunday afternoons, Thursday nights, Monday mornings, in the collection room early on together, him educating me, teaching me about the world of craft. And I think what we drew from it was texture, materiality, color, humility, authenticity. If you ever have a chance to walk through that collection room, you really, really need to, especially with him, where he'll open the door for you and show you something you've never seen before. But this idea that all these things are made by a human being is so clear in that collection that we had this huge responsibility now that everything we did in the building needed to be pure and real and authentic and coming from a place of humility. And so it was fantastic. I mean, when the collection was put in storage for construction, we missed it. Because we were having a dialogue with it all the time.
I'd just like to talk about the windows. I've been a gallery guide for many years in the museum. And up till now, when we got to the last gallery, where of course Irwin's cutouts got around, people would always stop and say, this is the best art there is in the whole museum. Not once, virtually very many times. So I was really interested knowing that we put so many glass windows and open air views, how yesterday was the first day with guests would work. And I had decided I wouldn't put aside, I would highlight in my galleries that I had to do the windows. And they didn't take away from the art, and they added to the art. And it's an amazing experience knowing how the view of the ocean always took first place, but it doesn't now, and it's outstandingly adds. So I really commend you.
Can I kiss you? Thank you for saying that, because we certainly have had many a conversation about how much daylight, and daylight is really sort of the biggest issue. You know, there is mitigation that needs to take place on the very bright days. We need the shades to protect the art. But this incredible view gives you a sense of grounding. Sometimes it gives you a break. I think it just makes the spaces more human. Because especially as you're going around the museum, you find your bearings. And yeah, I think I just never had the worry that art would take away from, I mean, that the view would take away from the art. But if anything, it made it much more clear that you're in this place, in this collection. And I was in the cells of 4 fried eggs right next to the window. And I was standing there thinking, I couldn't be happier. I want those eggs. And that really was just so marvelous. And there was something maybe humorous is not wrong, but I think plain human that sort of happens here, that inspires and motivates you to take life into consideration as it gets transformed by the art.
All right, any last question before we all get some fried eggs for dinner? I have one last question.
I just wanted to ask
yeah.
I'm actually really excited to be here because I had the opportunity to work on the security drawings for Ming Museum with Berg Electric over. I had the opportunity to finish them because the engineer who put it together, he actually ended up moving. And so they handed me this project and I was like, awesome, this is so cool. And you're totally right about the elevations. You're totally right about the craft because we got some of the strangest orders back, like that, some of the corrections back. It was like, you want me, yeah, from you. Because it was like, you want me to take the motion detector, put it in the corner and paint it, what? You know, like you don't paint like motion, you know, so there was all this, there were all of these opportunities to come up with these different solutions that were awesome and different than what every other project was entailed. So it just comes full circle, which I think is really, really cool. So I guess one of my questions I want to ask is, how do you get engineers' eyes to roll so hard? Because honestly, that's a pattern I've noticed with a lot of well-known architects where like Frank Gehry wants the bricklayers to twist this thing and everybody's rolling their eyes in the beginning and then they end up getting the project tattooed on them at the end of it. So, yeah, I think it's just so awesome that what you guys do, because you guys were honestly one of the only architecture firms that really stood on, just really held their ground when it came to, you know, maybe when the engineers pushed back on, well, no, we can't do that.
There's poetry and security. Sure. And I'm so glad that you're here and you brought it up. Well, you know, I'm going to just tell one little story of Raymond Drywall was the subcontractor. And they began the project with this very matter-of-fact drywall this and plaster that. And Albert was their project manager, and he had never seen a set of drawings like this or the notes. And it took months, but he began expressing himself and making mock-ups and wanting to meet every time we were there. And it just became so wonderful to watch him grow into the narrative, right? So I don't know, I was exploring YouTube a couple weeks ago and I see this, Raymond has won a drywall award for Big Day. And Albert makes the film of acceptance and he says, I have never experienced something like this in my life and I only hope my career will be this again. And I'm, wow. It was just so satisfying because this is bringing an artist forward out of the everyday aspect of the work that they do to allow themselves to express themselves. And I just couldn't be more satisfied by that. But I really appreciate that you thought about where that damn motion detector was. There are a couple that we need to change, so.
I'll contact middle supervisor.
Well, I'm not sure if there's a better, more optimistic way to end the conversation. So please, if we can give a round of applause. applause to our two on Saturday. And there were tickets that you needed to get if you want to go on Saturday. I don't know what's available now, but do look, and it's going to be wonderful. And for Mingay, of course, please go many times. Notice all the details. They're fantastic. Thank you.